Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Deku become a villain part 3. Before I start, please do support for more awesome content and subscribe my channel and like this video and also share this video with your friends. I have created my other videos playlist, there you can watch my all videos easily, check out as well. Let's start this video. Izuku yawned, leaned his head sideways, and rotated his shoulder, still sore from his morning and evening gym training. He'd have to check the instructions on the stretches again. He wasn't excited about feeling like this all day every day, but his father really wanted him to get fit soon, so random criminals couldn't just grab him like they had that one time. With his studies and all the other training, he didn't have much free time left, but he was sure he could squeeze in more training than his father's plan required. He counted hours in his head and scribbled notes on his notebook, trying to figure what would be the most efficient use of his time. Father wanted him to improve his agility, so Izuku started wondering what would help with that most. Midoriya. Ida stood up and turned to face Izuku, waving his arm. You have been muttering the whole lesson. Stop that. It is distracting others, and you should focus on the lesson yourself. That is enough, Ida, the teacher commanded. Midoriya, focus on the lesson. I don't know how your old school did things, but here we don't think about other things in class. In my old school, that was dependent on a person's quirk, Izuku answered, wondering how long they would keep treating him as the new guy. He had transferred months ago. The lesson, Midoriya. Focus on it. Izuku shut up and focused on his notebook, the one with notes for the class. They were studying history and had just reached the point where people started being born with quirks. Now, the teacher continued, as part of your grade you will do group presentations for the societal consequences of quirks appearing. I will assign the groups. Izuku wanted to smirk. They were literally talking about his father's childhood. The only problem was explaining to his group where he found the information. Team 3, Tenya Ida, Izuku Midoriya, and Nori Uehara. Izuku's face froze, staring forward when the last name was declared. It was bad enough to be in the same class with a girl that would have compared him to a chimpanzee just a year earlier. The idea of having to work with her made him think about his father's mention of a sudden accident. His hand shot up. You don't get to change your group, Midoriya. Here we expect everyone to be able to work with everyone. Your topic will be the rise of organized villainy and the so-called emperor of villains who nearly ruled Japan. Izuku would have fallen off his seat if he wasn't still so focused on who he needed to work with. A chair scraped against the floor as Uehara joined him and Ida. They stayed quiet until the teacher finished assigning groups and let them work for the rest of the lesson. Uehara was the first to speak. So, has either of you ever heard about this so-called emperor of villains? I have read about a villain that created an army of followers when the societal order collapsed. I don't think his name was mentioned anywhere, Ida commented. That is because he only used the name of his quirk, Izuku said, speaking only to Ida, unwilling to even look at the third member of their group. It was called All for One. How do you know that? Uehara asked, sounding like she didn't believe him. I have a bookshelf full of notebooks on different quirks. And you complained about valuing quirks. Uehara raised her nose and managed a grin so arrogant Bakugo would have been left second. Being interested in quirks and valuing people based on their quirks are two different things. One gives you knowledge. The other just makes you a trash person, Izuku recited in a tired tone. Remember when you said that it is impossible to make a person quirkless? Yeah, the whole idea is ridiculous. Not exactly, Izuku said, finally meeting the girl's gaze. He had to choose his words carefully. There are a lot of inconsistencies with any sources on All for One, but most sources from the time claim he could take and give away people's quirks. Many people followed him because he either gave them quirks or took away ones they didn't want. Must have been pretty dumb people to have given their quirks away, Uehara said. Just because you only care about people if they have quirks doesn't mean everyone else does, and some quirks aren't any better than being quirkless even today, Izuku said. He was squeezing his hand into a fist under his desk. Especially back then when quirks were relatively rare. Imagine having a mutant quirk or hard to control quirk with side effects when people with quirks were seen as quirkless people. Fine, you're right. Being a mutant quirked freak isn't that much better than quirkless. So, do you think Ida is a freak, since he has a mutant quirk? Izuku shot back. How many people does this class actually have that you don't think less of because of their quirks? Izuku had never even raised his voice, but the people closest to them were already stopping their own discussions to listen in. It's not like they are quirkless, Uehara bypassed the mutant question. Some of us just have better quirks. You should see it. Uehara, I still don't even know what quirk you have, Izuku deadpanned. He was tired of this, and it showed. He couldn't even get emotional at her. I doubt it will help with the assignment, so I don't care either. You too, Ida interrupted. We have an assignment to complete. Can you show us the sources you got that information in? Ida asked. Izuku tensed. Probably. It has been a while since I ran into them. There are a lot of old books of people describing their experiences after quirks appeared. I can look into it after school. Is there anything else you can think of we should look into? Izuku hummed a bit and looked away from his teammates, trying to think of something and remember both things he had heard from his father and what he had actually read. We should consider differences in how people saw these things compared to today. Like today, people talking about that time talk about how many villains there were and call All for One the emperor of villains, but I don't think people at the time really used those terms. The clear heroes and villain system only appeared later. It was more about being vigilantes or criminals, or, Izuku paused, maybe revolutionaries. At that time both Ida and Uehara seemed confused. A lot of people tried to use the chaos to rebuild society the way they thought was right, and things now are as they are because of who eventually succeeded at that. I think that would be a more accurate way to describe All for One than the emperor of villains. People probably call him that mostly because winners write the history books. That could be an excellent point of view, Ida said excitedly, waving his hands side to side. How did people see villains before the term became common, and how societal progress led to our current understanding? Yeah, something like that, Izuku said. At least Ida didn't disregard the idea straight away. They mostly focused on the idea of how people viewed things and the structure of the presentation for the rest of class. Izuku promised to get more information and got out of the class as fast as he could. It was the last lesson of the day, so he left and only stopped some distance down the street. Soon Ida walked out and started down the same street. He waited until Ida reached him and then matched the taller boy's pace. How do you feel about the idea of looking at the assignment from how people at the time would have seen it? Can you write about it without framing it as a modern heroes and villains system? Shouldn't we discuss this with the whole group? We are supposed to be able to work in teams, no matter what we might think about the other members. No, Izuku responded. Excuse me? I've spent too much time surrounded by shit people, Izuku said, looking at the ground. I tried being nice and making friends, tried to ignore them, tried to turn the other cheek. Let them mock and harass and do whatever they wanted without standing up for myself. It doesn't help. I only got away from them when I left. I am too tired of the garbage to ignore it again, pretend it is not important, or work with people like that just because a teacher that has never experienced it says so. Don't you feel anything that she called you a freak? Of course I do, but it is not our place to disrupt the class for personal reasons. Like he hadn't already disrupted the same class. You want to become a hero, right? Izuku asked. Of course. How are you going to stand up for people if you can't even stand up for yourself? If capturing a criminal would disrupt something in someone's life, if it wasn't polite or convenient to do in that situation, would you just let them go? Izuku's words left Ida silent, but Izuku felt like ranting a bit more. Something in Ida made him seem annoying enough to need a reality check, while also feeling like someone that was safe to talk to. Part of Midoriya simply wanted to test him. Ida had been nice, he had only judged Izuku on his actions, but he already knew Izuku had a quirk without knowing what it really was. When Izuku continued, his voice was much quieter. If you aren't going to stand up against what is wrong no matter what, don't become a hero. Someone will die waiting for you to help them. Having family members that are heroes doesn't make you one any more than a hero license does. They kept walking in silence until they reached Izuku's house. Right at the gate he stopped and sighed. Sorry for venting like that. I'm just too tired of people like her to just take it. I'll try to look up the information for the assignment. He turned his back to Ida to get inside. Midoriya, Ida said, making him stop, what happened to you? Remember the second question people asked me on my first day? What I said before the teacher said I didn't need to. Izuku walked inside without waiting for Ida to remember and leaned against the inside of the door. He really needed to be more careful at what he said. Thinking of that, he was reminded that he needed to find an excuse why he knew about All for One. He glanced at his palm, where the little hole was hidden behind the tape and makeup. After a moment he headed to his room to do his homework in the little time he had reserved for it. Afterwards he headed down to the gym to prepare for the evening's training. Kurogiri showed up right as he was supposed to, but as Izuku stepped closer, Kurogiri didn't immediately open a portal for him. Young Midoriya, your father has told me to take you somewhere else today. He has decided that it is time for you to meet someone before training. Izuku raised his eyebrow and tensed up slightly. He had not seen many people with his father, just Kurogiri and the doctor who didn't really show himself. If his father was going to introduce him to someone else, he at least trusted Izuku, but what kind of person would this be? I still need to talk with Dad also, he said. Of course, Kurogiri answered and opened a portal. He is receiving treatment, but will be in contact with us. Good, Izuku said, and stepped through the portal. He looked around as soon as his head left the mist. He wasn't sure what he had expected, but a reasonably decent-looking, though windowless, bar was not that. He quickly focused on the only person that was already in the room, a light blue-haired pale-skinned man with a freaking human hand on his face. Izuku hoped for the best, but got the feeling it was not fake, but a real human hand. The man's mere presence put Izuku on edge in a similar way to facing a Nomu in training. So, who is this kid Kurogiri? The man asked in a raspy voice. His name is Izuku Midoriya. Young Midoriya, this is Tamura Shigaraki. The strange man looked down at Izuku, scratching his neck. Even though he had no weapons, Izuku got the feeling of danger from the man. Hello, Izuku said, stuttering for the first time in a while. I don't like him, Shigaraki rasped, and suddenly moved forward, reaching his hand towards Izuku. Thanks to his father's training, Izuku stepped aside to evade the attack in time, but it turned out to be useless, as a small mist portal appeared in the path of Shigaraki's arm. Behind the man, his hand appeared from another portal midair. It swung in anger and touched one of the bar stools along the brown wood counter. Izuku gulped as the stool turned into dust. One touch from this man, and he would be dead, and he couldn't even see if the quirk was active as one could with his dragon blade. This one is not for you to kill, Kurogiri reprimanded Tamura. Master would be very angry if you did. Why would sensei care about some skinny kid? That is a very good question. All for one slightly distorted sound came out of nowhere. After a few seconds, Izuku spotted an empty computer screen and speakers. Shigaraki pulled his arm from the dark portal, and Kurogiri moved to clean the pile of dust it left behind. Izuku's father continued. But is that any way to talk to your brother? Brother? Izuku and Shigaraki said at the exact same time and with the same tone. Izuku, father started, Tamura is someone I saved as a child shortly before your birth. I may have been more of an occasional sensei than a true father, but he is effectively my adoptive child. Tamura, Izuku is my long-hidden biological son. You two should get along. The two youths stared at the blank computer screen and then each other. Shigaraki started scratching his neck. You mean there is another Shigaraki? Shigaraki asked. Izuku blinked, staring at him. What do you mean? He asked. Shigaraki is the name I gave him. It is my original name. Midoriya was the identity I created, my father explained. So, my name is made up, Izuku said, surprised with how much the thought stung. Aren't they all? You know what I mean, Dad. Can I at least have the real name, Shigaraki, now? Izuku asked. It took a while for his father to answer, while shy Tamura kept scratching his neck ever faster. There you can, but to the rest of the world you and your father must still be Midoriya. That's okay. Sensei, why are you doing this? Tamura interrupted. There wasn't supposed to be a player 2. There wasn't, but things changed. Though it is not yet completely sure if Izuku will be a player. There are still choices he needs to make. So, will I still lead the league? Yes, Tamura. The league is yours regardless of his decisions. Depending what Izuku chooses, he can do other things for this family business of ours. I would benefit from a representative to send in my name, rather than the league. You two should still work together and help each other. Fine, Tamura rasped. What can he even do? You mean what my quirk is? Izuku said, already disappointed. Quirk, talent, skills, whatever, can you actually be useful to the sensei, or are you planning to drag us down? Izuku stared at his adoptive brother for several seconds, and slowly a wide grin spread across his face. Unlike students with supposedly bright futures at every school he had ever gone to, this creepy villain didn't just care about how he happened to be born. I think we can get along, Izuku said. You didn't answer my question, Shigaraki complained. I know a lot about different quirks and what they can do, Dad and Kurogiri are teaching me how to fight, and I inherited Dad's quirk. Sensei's quirk? Tamura asked, staring at Izuku without moving for a while. Yes, I can take other people's quirks, though I have only taken 2, Izuku said. Tamura continued staring at him for a moment and sat down on the closest stool. So, another boss fights for the heroes. Probably not, Izuku waved his hands defensively as his smirk turned into an awkward smile. He too sat down a couple stools away from Tamura. Without saying a word, Kurogiri pulled a bottle of cold lemonade from under the counter. It was even Izuku's favorite lemonade. It is yet to be seen. Nevertheless, you will not talk about Izuku to anyone, Tamura, not even within the league, their father said as Izuku sipped the drink. You should let him know what you can do too. I can destroy, I have trained to fight and destroy, my quirk can destroy anything I touch with all 5 fingers, and my goal is to destroy what I hate. Like what? Izuku asked, once more uncertain on how to feel about the man. This whole cursed hero-dependent society, where the wrong quirk is enough to destroy your life. where people walk around smiling even surrounded by deadly quirks, but abandon people with quirks they randomly choose to fear or just ignore others' plight because they think a hero will come. I want to bring it down and grind it to dust. Maybe we have something in common, Izuku admitted hesitantly, staring at his drink, but what then? Tamura looked at him confused, as far as Izuku could tell with a hand on the man's face, but instead of a clear question there was just a huh. What are you going to do afterwards if you collapse the society? Do you have a plan or conviction for something? Not that destroying an entire society is something you can just do. Oh, then what would you do? Izuku turned his head to stare forward at the bar's shelves of drinks. After a moment of silence, he decided what to say. I think we feel the same about how the society is, but destroying it wouldn't help anyone unless you can create a better one in its place. Honestly, I have never seriously intended or planned to do anything major to change the world, though spending time with Dad has made me think about it more. I think I would want to change the society, not destroy it, force it to bend, if that is what it takes. Maybe it breaks in the process, but even if change needs destruction, it should be to create something better. There is no point destroying for the sake of destruction, it should be a means to an end at least. Tamura started scratching his neck again. Before he could respond, or try to disintegrate Izuku again, their father's chuckle came through the speakers. You should listen to your brother Tamura. You still need to learn how to think more than one step ahead. Whether you manage to destroy what you hate, that alone will not take you forward, or make the league more than a short-lived collection of thugs. Yes, sensei, Tamura said, his face visibly tense even under the hand. He might have also gritted his teeth together. You should take some time today, to get to know each other. Unfortunately, I cannot run your training as usual today, Izuku. The doctor wants to run some treatments today. I'll tell him to prepare for yours. You can spar with Tamura, if you think you two aren't going to kill each other in the process. It might be Izuku said, and fell silent mid-sentence. What do you mean prepare for mine? I told you I would have him prepare a copy of the regeneration for you. Your body should have fully stabilized from your last acquisitions, if you feel you are ready. Regeneration? Tamura asked. You are giving him a quirk like that even though he hasn't yet done anything? Yes. Why? Aha. Because unlike you, his body can adjust to handle it without extensive modifications which the doctor isn't ready to do yet, unless you want to become a Nomu. Izuku should also be better able to suppress the quirk when needed to hide it, at least once I am done with him. His father's tone made Izuku shiver. Tamura stared at the screen for a moment before turning back against a bar counter and gesturing to Kurogiri. He muttered quietly enough that father might not have heard. Definitely a boss battle. Do you want to talk about anything else? Their father asked. Yes, Izuku said quickly, then shrunk a bit, poking the tips of his index fingers against each other. He even looked away, even though he had only been looking at an empty screen. Kurogiri gave Tamura a drink. I was going to ask if you know anywhere where I might find information on, well, you. You need to explain more to my son. We have a history assignment at school. My group has to talk about the Emperor of Villains. Well, that is a name I haven't heard in a while. I thought so. I need to know about those times for the presentation and find sources to explain why I knew about you in the first place. Sounds like you have been careless, tsk. Somehow Izuku managed to shrink even further on the stool. His father hadn't reprimanded him like that before. Early level boss, Tamura muttered. Liquid dropped around Izuku, leaving his skin sticky as he was pulled up from the tank. As soon as his feet touched the floor they gave up and he collapsed on his knees. He was shaking and breathing hard in his oxygen mask. Doctor? His father's voice sounded somewhere nearby. Minor state of shock and residual pain, unsurprising since he is still fully human and the quirk has a strong impact on his physiology, even if he can adapt to it and doesn't require other changes. I could administer him sedatives to ease it, but he will properly recover faster without them. The firm hand landed on Izuku's shoulder. It stayed there until Izuku's shaking eased and his father took away the oxygen mask and pulled him to his feet for long enough to reach a nearby hospital bed with a pile of towels already there. Izuku grabbed one to clean his face. The sticky feeling was disgusting. How are you feeling? He had to wait for a moment while Izuku wiped his face. Izuku could barely speak, his breath still heavy, never doing that again. Feigning quirks that involve physical or physiological changes can be unpleasant, and implanting them artificially like this needs to be done with enough time. You will not need to endure the same while acquiring quirks of your own, the doctor assured. How long was I there? Just over 2 days. It is Sunday evening. Will I feel better by the morning? Mostly yes, the doctor said. This time Izuku could actually see the doctor. The old man seemed really familiar, but Izuku couldn't place his face. You survived going to school with brain damage. You will survive this. You can pretend to be sick for a day if you need to. No, Izuku responded, shaking his head. We have our history presentation tomorrow. The doctor looked toward father. At least she raised him to be conscientious. But she did. I could already see it in his training. Izuku looked away while wiping himself. He still wasn't used to receiving much praise outside of his mother's. The doctor pulled a tray closer and turned to Izuku. Don't bother. It won't go away until you get a proper shower. I will take blood samples for a checkup and then you can go. Do you think it succeeded? Izuku asked. The doctor looked at him for a moment through his big goggles. He put down his still unopened needle for taking blood and picked up a scalpel, which he held in front of Izuku. That is up to you to test, the old man said. Izuku took the scalpel and stared at it. His hands started shaking again. You don't need to try it now, but you should be able to endure much more pain than that, his father said. Izuku gulped. He knew that, and the scalpel would be little compared to some of his training sessions. Cutting himself just went against fundamental human nature. He held open his left hand and brought down the scalpel with the right. He winced as the blade cut skin and drew blood. He cut about a 1 centimeter long cut and stared at it, feeling a little ill. At least he would have stared at it, but after blinking he couldn't find the wound anymore, and there was no pain. Wow, Izuku gasped. Excellent, now you can survive actual training, and with the summer vacation you will also have time for much more of it. Izuku's hands weren't shaking anymore, but the cold shiver was almost as bad. Concern for what actual training would mean made him forget any worries about the presentation. He was still feeling like he might vomit if he got up from his seat too quickly. He didn't even scowl at Uehara when he had to stand with her in the front of the class. Uehara started with the basic facts of the year. Of course, she blamed the quirkless majority of the time for everything, depicting the spread of quirks as the reason for things getting better. He even briefly imagined reaching to the girl and demonstrating all for one for the presentation, but restrained himself at least that much. The teacher didn't interrupt or even scowl at Uehara's bigotry. Ida at least stuck to the script, discussing the rise of organized villainy and first points about the Emperor of Villains. Then it was Izuku's turn. Despite being often referred to as such in modern history books when they mention him at all, the sources of the time do not seem to use that name, as it only appears in sources written decades after he rose to power. We also could not find any reliable source about his original name. Most sources from his lifetime seem to refer to this man as All for One. This was the name of his quirk and secret to his power and influence, Izuku explained, and tried to stand steady despite a growing nausea he was feeling. Today, with quirks so common, they are widely considered an inherent part of a person, like any organ or thoughts in your head, so most people naturally find this hard to believe. But based on sources from the time, All for One possessed a unique quirk that allowed him to take other people's quirks as well as use and give them away. It is not known if the quirk had any limitations. As expected, the statement caused muttering across the classroom. The teacher seemed thoughtful. Izuku continued explaining how All for One gained power with his quirk, leaving out details he would not have found from their sources, and leaving in some falsities that he did. He was still careful to not refer to his father as a villain, except in the sense of how modern society described him. As for how his story ends, we don't really know, Izuku lied. There are no reliable records of his death. We have read some stories talking about him being around even in modern times. Some online conspiracy theorists even claim All Might stopped him, but that would make him well over 100 years old. Either way, trying to fit him in the modern hero-villain dichotomy with names like the Emperor of Villains is inaccurate and fails to explain how things were back then and his role in all of it. Looking at him without falling into using our modern standards, it seems he saw change in the society as it was at the time, like many others did, but was over time simply left on the losing side and labeled a villain for opposing what we consider the norms today. Winners write the history after all. That is the end of this presentation. Thank you for listening. He got an applause that seemed more cautious than the previous presentations had received. Izuku glanced at the teacher, who scribbled notes and then turned to face them. That was an interesting presentation, especially because many of your conclusions went beyond what is generally required. I am curious, what sources were they based on? You especially didn't seem to question the existence of the quirk All for One much, even though its supposed ability runs contrary to our current understanding of quirks. The so-called current understanding of people in this society includes many ideas, especially about quirks, Izuku said, and glanced at Uehara, that doesn't make them true. If you look at the actual sources and statements from the time without bias, they are consistent on the basics of his power. The sources are listed in the notes of the slides. I had to go to the National Diet Library for the most important ones. The most surprising part is that he seemingly had massive influence on the country, but almost no one today seems to remember him beyond vague stories of an Emperor of Villains being a major villain a long time ago. No other history class I have been to has even mentioned him, at least not by name. Did you go all the way to Tokyo to visit the library? The teacher asked. Only Midoriya did, Ida admitted, not knowing how easy travel was by warping. He found most of our material that wasn't online. The teacher nodded and wrote notes. I also liked how you discussed people's different views back then compared to today. Good things people have learned and evolved since then, Uehara commented. Too bad Midoriya wouldn't properly discuss the flaws of the ideas of people like this all for one. Just because people didn't realize to call him a villain doesn't make him not one. You think that every idea that disagrees with yours is flawed, Midoriya added. And you can't see the reality. Probably because you barely got a quirk and can't properly appreciate it. At least I don't shit on people for how they were born. You are no better than the people that treated the first people with quirks like monsters, Midoriya turned to face Uehara. Okay UTW, the teacher paused mid-sentence as Izuku stumbled and brought his hands to his mouth. He spun towards the door a bit unsteady, but it was already too late. A single gagging noise was the only warning before Izuku's lunch came up and onto the floor. Ha! Uehara laughed even as Izuku rushed to a nearby trash can. It seems you can't stand even your own ideas. Uehara, the teacher said, go back to your seat. We will talk after the lesson. Izuku would have been happy to see a teacher doing at least something to her, but that little wasn't exactly enough to distract him from vomiting in front of the whole class. Maybe standing around for a long presentation hadn't been the best idea the day after finishing a quirk implantation. The regeneration quirk was really exacting a price for its power. It was still worth it though, as proven by his shattered arm the next time he trained, when his father let Nomu fight more seriously. At least the creature stopped when Izuku told it to. His father came to kneel next to Izuku. Izuku yelped and bit his teeth together at the pain of burns and broken bones and the reformation of those bones as his body healed from the damage. Thankfully, the quirk worked rapidly. He could see his arm twisting back to its normal direction at a visible speed, and soon the pain too started disappearing. Not long after the injury was gone, and the only sign of it ever existing was Izuku's heavy breathing that took a while longer to calm down. He raised a formerly broken arm, flexing and turning it. The only pain he felt was in his head from adapting to the powerful quirk. He got up to face his father. Do you understand now the reason I have pushed you so hard? Imagine if a hero or villain did that to you. Even with a regeneration you were completely incapacitated and vulnerable. As powerful as this quirk is, it does not make you immortal. And it still hurts, Izuku said, and looked at his healed arm. He barely noticed his father's arm moving just in time to lean away from an air cannon blast. Then train until no one can hurt you. I am an elderly man stuck to a breathing machine and still need to hold back. An elderly man with hundreds of quirks, Izuku pouted. Actually only 94, father responded. I used to have more, but even for me it was quite a mental strain at the peak of the number of quirks. After my injuries it became too much. In a single day my near unlimited potential was diminished to a fraction of what it used to be, so I shed some and decided to be more selective. I think my limit now is around 100 depending on the quirk, and the doctor worries even that will yet decline. I have already noticed greater strain in using my quirks. Izuku stared at his father for a long moment, uncertain how to respond. You still have the potential I lost. You only need to work to build on it. So, father stepped away, Nomu too, destroyed. One of the Nomus waiting at the edges of the room charged forward, reaching to grab Izuku who jumped out of the way. A long and thin blade of flames appeared behind his right hand as he activated the dragon blade and vibration. A rapid swing cut Nomu's hand off, that much he had managed before, but the other hand was coming in for a punch. Even as he had swung with one blade, he was forcing the other to gather and thicken against the back of his other hand. Manipulating the shape of the fire he could use, it was a small shield instead of a blade, but if he was too slow again, or the shield was too thin again, he would need to rebuild an arm again. The fiery shield hummed from its rapid vibrations until the noise was covered under a loud thump. Izuku flew backwards, feeling his bones creaking as they barely held together. He stumbled as his feet touched the ground a fraction of a second later, but this time he remained on his feet. The Nomu continued its assault, charging forward with its cut and singed arm spread wide. After enduring a shattered arm, that was one bear hug Izuku did not want to experience, unless the creature was planning to tear him in two. Izuku's first instinct was to scream and run. His father's training was to attack. With adrenaline running through his veins, Izuku charged forward, ducked under Nomu's arms, and shoved his right hand upwards. Hot droplets fell on Izuku, making him jump away just in time to avoid being trapped under the falling body. He crouched to stare at the Nomu, the dead Nomu, with its exposed brain split in two and not healing. Excellent, his father said. Your first clear victory, and you didn't even need the regeneration. I didn't mean to kill it. My body just moved before I had time to think. That means you are developing proper fighting instincts. Your analytical abilities are impressive, but sometimes you must be able to just move, unless you find a quirk that increases the speed of thought, he declared, walking close enough to ruffle Izuku's hair as he spoke in a softer, warmer tone. I know it is a bit shocking to you. With Kurogiri around, it is difficult for you to accept that Nomu was just a brainless creature, but you still did good. In fact, I have a gift for you. Nomu 1, bring the suitcase. The Nomu that had broken Izuku's arm before took a large black briefcase and brought it to the father and son. The father took it and held it open in front of Izuku. Izuku simply stared at the contents for a moment until he reached in and took out a black face mask reminiscent of the lower half of his father's helmet. It wasn't as thick and wouldn't have covered its user's neck, but the front had a thicker shield-like part than his father's. It didn't have pipes coming from it, but the black metal had silvery horizontal lines that mimicked their look. Is this? Heroes have their unique costumes to help in creating their public image. Many villains have them as well, but primarily to hide their identity, he said. You told Tamura you want to change the society instead of just complaining about it, something I have been waiting to hear. If you are going to be involved with anything without abandoning your normal life, you need a costume and a new identity. Go take a shower and try it on while I clean up this mess. Izuku took the suitcase in silence. He wasn't even sure what to think about this gift. He was grateful, but it felt like he was being pushed ahead faster than he was prepared for. He took off his shirt stained in Nomu blood and took a long shower to wash the rest off himself. As he was drying with a towel, he stopped in front of the bathroom mirror to see if he had washed off everything. He stopped to stare at his reflection and wondered who was the person looking back. Some of the depressed tiredness he accumulated over the years was gone from his face, and his reflection looked older than he remembered, both his face and body, and the latter was really starting to show the results of his training. His endurance was never bad, but in the past no muscles had been actually visible. Now he was at least as fit as Bakugo. Just thinking the name made his expression darken, and he went back to the briefcase. He was suspicious of what his father, and especially Tamura, planned, but someone had to stand up against the Bakugos of the world. Izuku changed into the new villain costume. Similarities with his father's usual dress were obvious, but instead of a regular black suit, Izuku's costume was more akin to a formal military uniform with a solid black jacket and pants and, luckily, no tie. It actually reminded Izuku of his former black school uniform, which was the biggest problem that he had with the clothes. They were more comfortable than they seemed and didn't feel like they hindered his movements. There were two exceptions to the simplistic formal look. It came with quite tall and heavy-duty metal reinforced combat boots and gloves which also had metal at the back of his hands, fingers pieces like brass knuckles, and most likely fire protection for his quirk. Izuku would have preferred red boots though. It took him a moment to figure out how the helmet worked. Besides the collar, it had a thinner top half which the front side folded inside the sturdier back side. The lack of clear eye holes worried Izuku a bit since, unlike his father, he still had his eyes, but from the inside he could actually see just as well as with no mask at all, despite how the outside appeared. The one-way lenses even had a heads-up display. Cool, he said, surprising himself with the distorted and low voice that came out of the integrated voice changer. Somehow the lower part of the helmet seemed to fit it, a communication device, a microphone, and what appeared to be filters for Orgasmisk. He returned to his father. All of the low-tier nomus were gone, and there wasn't as much as a bloodstain left of the dead one. It was just his father, Kurogiri, and surprisingly Tamura. "Hello brother," greeted Tamura. The young man looked at him for a moment and muttered. "Literally a mini-boss. Looks good, just as I expected. How does it feel?" his father asked. "Great, like it was custom-tailored for me," Izuku responded. "That is because it was. But I never got measurements taken. I had to replace my eyes with quirks. In some ways they are better than normal vision. Acquiring precise measurements was no problem. I even observed how you typically move. The costume was made to work as a formal wear inspired by military uniforms to look representative while still being simple and practical in battle. The material is fire and stab resistant, but you will need something heavier if you plan to get shot. Not that getting shot would kill you anymore." Formally, Izuku muttered, "When you first introduced me and Tamura, you said something about being a representative." "Yes. All Might may have decimated my previous empire, but many separate operations still remain, mostly information gathering, secret research, and agents running my legal cover businesses. Things that cannot easily be stopped by punching. For years I have kept them under control from a distance, but sometimes a more direct contact is beneficial. Kurogiri can do only so much while Tamura and the doctor are busy with other matters. So, you want me to be your messenger?" Depending on your choices, you can become much more, but let's start with something less dangerous at least until you are equipped with more powerful quirks, in case you need to fight during such a mission. What do you mean? Izuku asked and activated his dragon blade. Both your blade and All for One are already known to others. At the moment you can only rely on the regeneration and vibration quirks while wearing that suit unless you are prepared to eliminate any and all weaknesses. Dad, Izuku said, walking closer to his father, there was a time I wanted to be a pro hero without a quirk, and if I practice with the vibration enough, I think it can be almost as powerful as Tamura's quirk and even more useful if I can control it enough to not give people brain damage. Tamura huffed at the mention of his name and walked away. All for One looked thoughtful. I did not intend to understate your abilities, but can you blame me? Parents worry. Skill or quirks, I will make sure you will be strong enough that danger fears you. Starting tomorrow we'll focus your training on using the vibration quirk alone. Until then I think you need a practice mission. Do you think I am ready? Maybe not yet, this time you will be accompanying Tamura on one of his meetings. Get a feel of things in the shadows of society. Tamura, he is all yours for the rest of the evening. Try to bring both of you back in one piece, without need for regeneration. Great, an escort mission, I hate those, Tamura muttered. Kurogiri, make us a gate. We'll see how. He paused and looked at Izuku, a strange look in his eyes. What? Izuku asked. What are we going to call you there? Oh, right, I can't let people hear my name. I need a code name if I'm going to do things like this. What do you use? Tamura Shigaraki, Tamura responded, annoyed. Your normal name? This is the only name and only life I have. I don't need to bother with any other shit. Then you could call me Shigaraki too, Izuku said, at least until I can think of an alternative name. We are brothers after all. Tamura stared at him for a moment and turned around. Fine, just don't get into my way. Kurogiri, gate. Izuku's favorite Nomu did as told, and a wall of mist rose in front of the two brothers. The darkness of the mist was replaced with an alley that wasn't much brighter. So where are we going? To meet a small gang and recruit them for the league. I am no messenger. Sensei trusts me to create and lead the league to support our goals. I will build an entire army for him and destroy the so-called symbol of peace. Build an army. We are recruiting soldiers. Got it. Here, Tamura said and pointed at a worn-out back door. Izuku reached out to knock. Stop being a fool. You are going to reveal we are coming. Aren't they waiting for us? I thought you had arranged a meeting with them. I am arranging a meeting with them now, Tamura said. Have to show NPCs their place and what I can do right from the beginning. In the underworld strength matters more than being nice. Now get out of my way. Tamura reached for the door clearly to turn the whole thing to dust. Wait, that might attract attention, I got an idea, Izuku said and pressed his fingers against the lock. It began shaking as he activated his vibration quirk and sped up the vibrations until there was a metallic crack. Izuku poked the door and it opened without resistance. He stepped aside and looked at Tamura who was scowling behind his face. After you. Remember, I am in charge and try not to look too weak, Tamura said as they walked to a small room and headed down a narrow spiral staircase. I will follow your lead. You have more experience in this. Yes, I do. The stairs creaked as they stepped on them, but as they descended that was covered under the sound of music coming from behind a door at the bottom of the staircase. When they got closer Izuku could also distinguish happy chatter. Tamura stopped and raised his hand with one finger up. This one is mine. He slammed his hand and all 5 fingers against the door. Both already worn out paint and exposed wood quickly turned gray and began shattering into dust. The chatter behind the door ended. Finally, whatever was holding it together failed and a cloud of dust fell on the ground. Behind it was a living room or lounge type room with worn out furniture and a shelf full of alcohol. Half a dozen people were standing facing towards the former door. Most of them had mutant-type quirks with all kinds of appearance-altering mutations, many on the more visible end of the spectrum. Izuku couldn't help but wonder if discrimination for those quirks had led them to this place. One of them, for example, had 4 arms and strange light blue skin with a lot of sharp edges, like some kind of rock. Another had 4 legs, each at 90-degree angles from each other. The most normal-looking person was wearing a skull-like helmet and small lightning sparked between his fingers, an electric-type quirk. Izuku was worried if the man could use the lightning from a distance. Mind if we come in? Tamura said and stepped over the pile of dust he had created. Not if you don't mind dying, the 4-armed blue man said and charged at Tamura. Izuku crouched into a fighting position, but Tamura was faster. Tamura evaded the larger man's attack, tripped him, and elbowed his back in a rapid attack that slammed the man onto the ground. Without his father's harsh training Izuku couldn't have even followed Tamura's moves properly. Tamura put all but one finger on the man's head. If I touch him with the fifth finger, he will share the fate of your door, Tamura threatened. I have come to talk, not fight. Stand down or die. Izuku wanted to comment on the hypocrisy in Tamura's statements, but he didn't want to upset the already dangerous situation. He tensed suddenly. Something nearly imperceptible moved at the edge of his vision, a step sounded against the floor. The attacker was fast, but not as fast as Izuku's father's air blasts. Izuku leaned out of the way of the near-invisible attacker and slammed his fist at the back of the attacker's head. The chameleon-looking villain became visible again, groaning against the floor. In a split-second decision, Izuku mimicked Tamura, holding his hand against the chameleon villain's head despite the dark memories that the action threatened to bring up. Stay down, he said, his voice made more threatening by the helmet's voice changer. My quirk can be just as deadly as my brother's. Who are you? The electric man shouted. Izuku glanced at Tamura. I am Tamura Shigaraki, the leader of the League of Villains, and I have come to offer you an opportunity for something more than this. Tamura gestured at the shady room. Compared to it, the League's bar was a high-end establishment. And who is your brother? The same electric man asked. Tamura growled at the question. He is observing. So, the mighty leader of the League of Villains needs a babysitter. Actually, I am here to learn from him, Izuku said, worried at what the seething Tamura might do. He took his hand away from the chameleon-like man and nudged him to get up and join his friends. You can free the other if you listen. Fine, we'll listen, but that doesn't mean you get to leave alive if we don't like what we hear. You talk big, but do you have the guts to live up to your words? So far you have committed random street crime and killed small-time thugs. I am offering you an opportunity to go after much bigger prey, to tear down the society that has oppressed you for how you were born. I will turn it to dust. Following his declaration, Tamura remained quiet, his eyes locked on the man in front of him, waiting for a response. So, you are going to destroy society, the electric man chuckled. Even if we assumed you could do that, what then? What will you do when there is nothing left? Izuku could see Tamura's finger twitching, the only one that was needed to disintegrate the man under him. The group in front of them seemed similarly tense. Izuku wasn't yet sure about Tamura's full capabilities, but they were outnumbered. He didn't share Tamura's apparent confidence facing those odds. Not to mention Tamura's trouble answering that particular question when Izuku had asked it. He gulped, grateful that his face was completely covered. Destroying the current society doesn't mean there is nothing left, he said. Tamura turned to give him an angry stare, but it was too late to hold back. Tamura himself had told him to show strength. Everyone here should know the wrongs perpetuated by this society. I am sure all of us have experienced them in some fashion, whether it's discrimination by how we were born or being failed by those so-called heroes who the society has made itself dependent on by suppressing everyone else. And any change that might threaten their power. For anything to change those systems, and people's belief in them must be destroyed, especially people's false confidence in the heroes. And that is going to benefit us how? As long as a small minority dominated by people with specific types of quirks is allowed to dictate what people consider right or wrong, everyone outside that ideal is doomed to live as second-rate citizens. Without people's support, it will be much harder for heroes to hold on to that power. And argue with that. At least you have a vision. It doesn't mean you can make it reality. How would you destroy people's faith in heroes? By destroying their symbol of peace, Tamura said, hiding most of the anger he certainly felt. The electric man whistled. Ambitious, I'd tell you to go to hell with that delusion, but he, the man pointed at Izuku, sounded like you had an actual plan. Personally, I am interested in seeing where this league goes. Now if you would let our friend go. A while later Izuku followed Tamura back up the stairs in silence. It was hard to tell Tamura's real feelings. Despite his usual behavior, he had actually kept cool in the meeting. They stepped back to the dark alley. Izuku saw the approaching hand just in time and jumped aside before Tamura could grab him. After failing at that, Tamura started scratching his neck. You bastard. What did I tell you when we came here? Tamura seethed. Don't be weak. No, I am in charge. You were supposed to shut up and stay out of the way. I was going to, but you still haven't figured your answer to that question. Dad would have been disappointed if the mission failed. You can take the whole credit if you want to. I don't care about the credit. The league is mine. Help Sensei however you can, but stay out of my way. Okay. I'm not interested in the league. I just want to do the best for my family. Tamura stared at him for a moment, turned away, and pulled his phone to call Kurogiri. Just stay on your own boss level. Izuku stepped into the large convention hall with his class and thousands of other students that had come to explore different high schools and study the paths to follow after junior high. Izuku's classmates were chatting excitedly about where they would go, or just about how great it was to get out of school for a day. So Midoriya, have you yet decided where you want to go? Ida asked. No, Izuku responded. I haven't really thought about school or its future in general in a long time. I don't know what I should or even want to do. The statement was completely true. He was already getting actively involved with his father's criminal businesses, and choosing a school hardly seemed to matter compared to that, but even before meeting his father he didn't know. Ever since he was disillusioned by the quirk-based society, and his dreams of becoming a hero had waned, there had been nothing to take their place. Have you? Ida said, and paused. I know you have complicated feelings about heroes, but I think you could be a great one. Izuku turned to look at the taller boy with narrowed eyes. Why? I am not talking about your quirk, Ida responded quickly, waving his arm defensively. I think your experiences would make you a better hero. You have talked about the importance of standing up for others, and I think you want to do that. I have also seen how you move in gym class. Do you practice gymnastics or martial arts? Sort of, but it's not to become a hero, just self-defense. Because you don't want to rely on a hero to come to the rescue. Harshly. You are going to see the hero schools, right? Izuku redirected the discussion. I want to go to UA, it is the best high school, and especially the hero school. I guess it was stupid question, Izuku said. Their other tracks are top level too. You should come see their stand too. I believe you would have a chance to get in on any track. Knowing how strict you are with everything school related, that is pretty high praise, Izuku said. Fine. It may be interesting to see what they have there. I don't really have any better ideas. They walked through the crowded hall. Izuku settled on walking behind Ida, using the larger teen as a plow to get through the masses of people. He could focus on glancing at the stands displaying different schools. They tended to get larger and fancier as they proceeded through the hall. The best and most prestigious schools were obviously placed further back to pull people in. Izuku paid specific attention to certain private, prestigious, and expensive schools like Samei, ones with no hero courses. He did not know what he wanted from his future, but he still valued quality education, whether it was a good school or getting pummeled to the ground by literal monsters in harsh battle training. At least he wasn't sore all the time, since getting the regeneration quirk. Healing wasn't just a matter of visible wounds after all. He could train harder and longer every evening and morning and not feel any effects by the time he left for school. It was amazing to feel perfectly okay every day, except the occasional dizziness and headache from stretching his quirk limit with such a powerful quirk. Getting to UA's stand didn't require searching, it had UA banners hanging from the ceiling and a big stage with a very loud man on it. Present Mick, Izuku muttered, I haven't seen him live before. But you have pages of notes on him and his quirk, Ida commented. It wasn't even a question. Quirk analysis part 7 pages 13 to 15, should probably redo him at some point. I was 11 when I wrote that, Izuku said, making Ida chuckle. What? Izuku asked. I am still trying to figure out what kind of person you are, and I can think of people in our school who couldn't keep such ordered records today, let alone at 11 years old. Okay, Izuku said, and turned his attention back to the loud pro hero talking about different facilities at UA. Naturally, he spent most of his time on discussing the extensive selection of hero training sites, despite the hero course being a small part of the overall student body. Yes, they had spent millions on fake cities and a giant stadium, but what did the other 80+% of the students have? Izuku's focus started wandering as his annoyance rose, and even present Mick's voice couldn't change that. Oh look, the villain wants to go to the USA. Izuku froze. He knew those words spoken in that tone. They made his bully radar glow like a Christmas tree. His head turned stiffly like a robot until his eyes found the source and locked on target. Behind the outermost stands a trio of students had surrounded a fourth indigo-haired one and were literally pushing him around between them. The victim of their bullying didn't just not resist, but very intentionally kept his hands close to his body and seemed to be pressing his mouth shut like saying anything might have proven the bullies correct. Dark patches under his eyes suggested he couldn't even sleep well. Come on. Show them your villain quirk. You have to anyway if you plan to apply. Better do it now than hide your real nature. The words made Izuku squeeze his hand into fists hard enough that fingers pressing against his palm actually hurt and messed up the covering on the hole his quirk caused. An image of Bakugo flashed over the apparent ringleader of the trio. Flickers of flame flashed dimly by his fists as he started walking towards the group. He had let the same thing happen for so long. Turned the other cheek too many times, but no more. Now he had decided to change things, and he would start by not ignoring another in the same position he had once been. He grabbed the ringleader's arm and yanked him away. It was a real struggle to not break the bully's nose right away, but he was just a student, not a Nomu. What exactly has he done for you to call him a villain? Izuku seethed. Who the hell are you? The bully asked, regaining his balance after Izuku's sudden yank. Answer my question or leave, Izuku said, ignoring the bully's words. Why are you calling him a villain? Because he obviously will be, the bully sneered. You'd agree if you knew his quirk. So, you are exactly the type of garbage I thought. Judging someone just by how you view the quirk he was born with. Actions are what matters, and you are clearly the villain here. Oh, look guys, the villain has a little friend. Are you the manipulating type or the type that makes you quirkless? And I know what it's like to live as a quirkless person in this society with people like you around, Izuku said before thinking, and raised his hand, no longer squeezed completely into a fist. One of the bullies seemed scared and took a step back. The ringleader frowned. If you wanted to talk your way out of this, you should have come with a better lie. Would you like a demonstration? Izuku flexed his fingers and smirked in a very unusual, almost Bakugo-like way. The thought alone made him jolt. The bully misunderstood the reaction. Thought so? In case you didn't get it yet, this guy is a brainwasher. Better keep your mouth shut if he even tries to say anything. One wrong word and you'll be his slave. Brainwashing? That sounds cool and useful for a hero, Izuku responded without needing to fake enthusiasm. The indigo-haired student stared at him, showing real emotion for the first time, mostly surprised. Imagine all of the situations he could de-escalate instantly without needing to resort to violence like most heroes. Hostage situations would be a breeze to him. You would seriously trust someone who could control your mind. About as much as I would trust someone whose quirk could kill me, and there are many of those, Izuku said, though he was not sure how true the last part was anymore. His expression turned darker. They are often celebrated as great heroes. Is everything okay? Ida asked from behind him. He had finally torn his attention from the UA hype. Bullies with Uehara's ideas on quirks or close enough, Izuku responded without turning his head. They think his quirk makes him a villain. Well, people like them are more likely to do that. I would know. Right, a villain would know a villain best, the bully ringleader butted in. Izuku tensed, knowing one of those villain claims was technically true. Nevertheless, he stepped forward between the bully and his victim. You know, if you really thought we are villains, you would be smart to be more careful how you act. Why bother? It doesn't mean you're good at it. As the bully spoke, he raised his hand, middle finger bent under his thumb, and finger flicked empty air. Stinging pain briefly struck the side of Izuku's forehead, making him jolt and glance to that side. No one was there close enough to have hit him. Cool quirk, Izuku remarked, but his tone was increasingly taunting. Doesn't seem to enhance the impact though, so you are limited by your strength. This time Izuku was the one whose shoulder was grabbed, though much more gently than before. He still moved to attack the person before his conscious mind had time to stop his arm. It was the indigo-haired guy he had come to help. You don't need to do this. I don't want you to get hurt. Yes, I do, Izuku responded quietly, and no, I won't. I doubt he can hit that hard. Izuku turned to face the bully with no fear in his eyes. This clearly made the guy angry, and he stared at Izuku with narrowed eyes. He raised his fist and punched down hard at empty air. The force struck up against Izuku's chin, making his head yank back. Izuku, are you okay? Ida asked. Izuku rubbed his chin. The blow had actually been strong enough to hurt, maybe even break something, but the pain was already going away. I'm okay. It just stung a little, he responded only to get an invisible slap on his face. Stop this, Ida shouted. We are not allowed to use quirks in public, and that's an assault either way. Good luck getting evidence of anything. I'm just practicing putting villains in their place for after I go to UA and become a pro hero. They do not need to prove anything. You have already shown me enough to ensure you will never enter UA, a new voice said. Izuku turned around trying to find the speaker. Down here. Izuku looked down, following the sound. There was a strange white animal-looking person whose species wasn't quite clear. And who would you be, mutant freak? The head bully sneered. My name is Nezu, but you can call me Mr. Principal, the creature said, and paused for a moment, gaining a threatening smirk of UA high. Izuku stared at Nezu for a moment, uncertain how to feel about the pro hero and principal of the crown jewel of the hero society. Slowly he realized what this meant for the bullies and glanced at their terrified faces. Izuku smiled. I find your behavior and attitudes inappropriate for my school. As my memory is quite good, I can assure you that none of you three will be accepted to UA on any track. Now if you would leave, so I can talk with these decent young men. The trio of bullies stared at the principal for a moment longer. One of them left first alone, and the other two followed soon after. Izuku was left with Ida, Principal Nezu, and the indigo-haired boy who he turned to in favor of the principal. Are you okay? He asked. The other guy blinked in surprise. Izuku feared it was because not many others had asked that question before. Yes, he answered. They are afraid enough of my quirk to not cross certain lines. Oh, right, my name is Hitachi Shinso. He held his hand out. Izuku gladly accepted the gesture and grabbed it with his own. Izuku Midoriya. Tenyu. I am happy to meet you all, Principal Nezu said, and then pointed at Izuku, especially you. I saw most of what you did, and many who walked past without doing anything. Have you considered seeking education as a hero? No, Izuku answered. I used to, but now I don't know what to do. Ida here on the other hand wants nothing more than to attend your school and become a hero. Interesting. This hall is quite noisy and crowded. Would you like to join me for tea somewhere more peaceful? Izuku briefly considered refusing straight away, but he saw the hopeful expression on Ida's usually serious face. One that was reflected on Shinso's face. We would love to, Izuku said, weighing the we. Excellent, Nezu announced, holding one of his hands, paws, up. Please follow me. The tiny principal started leading them towards the back of the UA stage. Ida followed most enthusiastically as Izuku strolled behind him. Shinso glanced at the principal's back and stayed back next to Izuku and leaned towards him. Thank you. The principal is right in that not many people would get involved. You did. I'm glad you're okay, Izuku said, but to be honest a big reason I did it is because those are the kind of people I hate the most. I'm no hero. I've just experienced my own bullies and those who would judge a person by their quirk. I can understand those feelings, but you still helped me. You are even talking to me even though they told you about my quirk. Remember what I said about quirks that can kill? Izuku asked and then pointed at Ida. Ida could crush both our skulls with a kick. Does that mean I should be afraid of him? He doesn't seem like someone who would do that. And you don't seem like someone who is planning to take over my mind, Izuku said. Shinso's face tensed. He was trying to hold something in. A small glint in his eye was more than enough for a member of Midoriya family to recognize impending tears. Izuku brought his arm over Shinso's shoulder. So how does your cool quirk work exactly? Shinso paused to look at Izuku. He drew a deep breath. If I talk to you, and you answer me, I can brainwash you to do whatever I say, with some limitations. It can't be anything that requires advanced thinking. How about your quirk? You said something about making those bullies quirkless. Is it some kind of erasure quirk? I didn't think people would consider those villainous since the effect is so short. Izuku's eyes widened, staring at the wall. He, and his bad decisions. He still had a long way to properly control himself and his mouth. It is not like that. Then what? Should I stop asking? Actually, Principal Nezu said, I would like to know too. They had just stepped through a door behind the stage into some maintenance corridor with much less background noise. The principal had stopped to face Izuku, and Ida was standing next to him looking confused. My hearing is very good, you know, Nezu said. Speaking of which. Nezu turned around. As Izuku raised his eyes from the small principal, his blood froze and started to boil at the same time. All Might had just stepped out of a nearby room in his colorful skin-tight costume and with the ever-irritating smile he had when failing to save Izuku's mother. Had his father not warned him about One for All's ability having resistance against being stolen, Izuku might have thrown away his cover to end the so-called symbol of peace right there. Oh, Mr. Principal, did you ask these students to join you for tea? Well, yes, I did. They are quite promising young men, especially Midoriya here. All Might followed, Nexus raised paw to Midoriya, who struggled to maintain his calm as visions of this man standing over his mother's corpse flashed in his mind. He still noticed All Might staring at him, his eyes widening before turning to face away from the man. He turned to Nezu, trying to ignore All Might. He briefly met Shinso's gaze. All Might, Shinso spoke, gaining the hero's attention. I have a non-physical quirk that people fear. Can I become a pro hero? That would be dangerous. Hero work is already dangerous as is, and even more so if you cannot use your quirk to protect yourself in battle or other dangerous situations. But if you get into the UA hero course you may in fact have one of them as your teacher. It would require an immense amount of work though. Thank you for answering. What are you doing here? Izuku asked. He pushed his emotions out of his voice, leaving it monotonous. All Might looked at him again with a strange look in his eyes. I am supposed to announce this on stage, but I guess it is okay since you are back here. I am going to begin teaching at UA next year. Sir, Ida finally joined the conversation. My name is Tenyu Ida. It would be a great honor to study under you. I will do everything I can to earn a place in UA. That's the spirit, All Might declared and gave Ida a thumbs up. By the way, did I interrupt something? I believe you were talking when I arrived, Mr. Principal. Oh yes. A few students engaged in quirk-based bullying. We were just talking about these young men's quirks that attracted such attention. I am afraid you need to hurry to the stage though. We don't want to disrupt the program. Of course, Mr. Principal, All Might said quickly with some mix of respect and fear in his voice. As he left, Izuku drew a deep breath as tension left his body. His hand he hadn't even noticed shaking calmed down. "Please follow me," Nezu said. He looked straight at Izuku as he did, and then turned around to enter the room All Might had come from. It was a break room with 3 small sofas, a low table between them, and a kitchen corner. The principal directed the trio to sit on one of the sofas and settled opposite to them. A water boiler was already ready and full on the table, so he could start making tea. Now where were we? Oh, yes. You were talking about your quirks. I already heard about Shinso's quirk, but there was something interesting you mentioned about your Midoriya. You said something about making people quirkless. Izuku had really screwed up. Nexus, knowing stare, told him the little creature was already suspicious, and Izuku still remembered All Might's surprised look. Thinking about this only delayed his ability to answer. Ida started speaking instead. I am not sure what this thing about making people quirkless is, but Midoriya's quirk is called Dragonblade, a fire quirk. Really? Shinso asked, clearly skeptical. That doesn't sound like a quirk that you would get bullied for. While Shinso expressed his feelings out loud, Izuku's attention was on Nezu and his piercing stare. Had he figured it out? Could they track Izuku to his father? Izuku was sitting tense between Ida and Shinso, pressing his hands together between his legs. He could keep lying as best he could, but if Nezu suspected something, getting caught lying would be more suspicious, and as principal of UA, Nezu probably had access to quirk registries. Izuku was still marked as having the quirk transfer. Ida, he started, his voice quiet. The Dragonblade, it isn't my quirk, not the original I was born with. I just acted like it was so I wouldn't be bullied like in my last school, like Shinso is. It didn't end when I gained my quirk, because my quirk made some of it worse. Izuku jolted when Shinso grabbed his arm, but the indigo-haired teen had an understanding smile. He was the only one who could understand what it took for Izuku to talk about the topic. Like Shinso's quirk, people fear what mine can do and think it's evil, that I would or can only become a villain because of it. So, you weren't lying when you said it can make people quirkless? Shinso asked. No, my quirk is a transfer quirk. I can take people's quirks from them or give them if I have any, I think. All it takes is a touch, and Izuku raises his hand in front of them. I can also use the quirks that I have taken. That is a very unique quirk, Nezu noted. What kind of quirks do your parents have? My mother had a weak telekinesis quirk. My father breathes fire. So, it would be a mutation. Now this Dragonblade quirk you talked about? Nezu asked in a lower, more serious tone. His expression was similarly serious, but he hadn't had any major reaction to hearing of Izuku's quirk. I was almost kidnapped a while back. Ida and Shinso gasped. During the struggle I took one kidnapper's quirk. He was so shocked I got away. I never talked about it with anyone. People would just blame me for stealing the quirk. Is that the only quirk you have taken? Nezu continued. You also think that I am some villain going around stealing quirks, Izuku accused, even if there would have been an element of truth in the accusation. For that evaluation I need to know what you have done, not what you can do. Izuku sighed and closed his eyes. I first discovered my quirk when I accidentally took the quirk of one of my bullies. Actually, my hair turned white first, but I didn't think to be careful after that. I gave it back when I figured out how to with my mom, Izuku said, not that he deserved it. If anyone in my old school behaved like a villain it was him, but everyone thinks he would be a great hero because he is strong with a flashy quirk. I cannot comment on that without having seen it myself, Nezu said, but what you describe is what often happens when quirks manifest. You can never be sure what kind of quirk a child will have or how it manifests. You should have no worries about the morality of how you have used your quirk if you have been honest with what you have told. It would also be highly useful for a hero to neutralize villains with dangerous quirks with minimal violence. The same applies to young Shinso's quirk. Have you considered applying to the UA Hero course? Yes, both Shinso and Ida said simultaneously. Izuku stayed quiet, looking away from the principal awkwardly. Midoriya? Nezu asked. I used to want to go to the UA Hero course, but now I don't know what I want anymore. Because of the bullies? Nezu wondered. One of the most important aspects of being a hero is wanting to help people no matter what, and you just demonstrated that with Shinso. I hope you aren't allowing your bully's words to hold you back from your dreams. You clearly would not support Shinso here doing so. I don't know, Izuku responded, still looking away, unwilling to let out his other reasons, even those that didn't involve his father. Very well. I am not going to try to pressure you. Just know that as the principal everything I have seen tells me you would be a great hero. Same goes for you Shinso, but you should take All Might's words to heart. Your quirk can help you become a great hero, but that alone is not enough. Just to pass the entrance exam and get into my school you need to train your body as well as your mind, and never forget the hero's first duty is to rescue. I will, Shinso promised. Excellent. I will wait to see you at the entrance exams. I would love to talk with you even longer, but I must soon get on stage. Oh, Midoriya, whatever you choose to do with your life, never lose that will to help others. Sometimes being a hero means getting involved somewhere you don't need to when everyone else walks by. Izuku didn't answer as all of them got up. The trio of students bowed, following Ida's lead, and thanked Nezu for the tea. Nezu walked with them back to the large hall and wished them the best. They walked past the UA stage. All Might was there talking in his usual pompous way to an audience that had tripled in size. Izuku purposefully looked away as he walked between Ida and Shinso. The two looked at All Might as they went, but didn't stop to watch. Probably didn't feel like it much after meeting the man personally. I still cannot believe we got the honor of talking with both the UA principal and All Might himself, Ida said, holding one of his fists in front of him. To think he is going to be a teacher at the school. My motivation to study hard has never been stronger. It would be an amazing opportunity, Shinso agreed, but I'm worried about the principal's words. I've been so focused on proving my quirk isn't evil, I haven't thought much about the physical requirements. I only have a few months to get into shape. And learn to fight, Izuku added. Whatever your quirk is, they expect you to be able to fight. Right, that too. I'm not sure where to start. Would you like help? Izuku asked. Do you know how to fight? A bit. I've been training for several months since the kidnapping thing, but it has been quite harsh training. I'm not sure, Shinso said, and looked down while holding the back of his neck with one hand. I don't want to be any more trouble to you, and there's nothing I can give back. You can be my friend, Izuku blurted out. All three of them stopped walking. You might be the only one who understands why I haven't had many in my life, and it is nice being around someone who can know my quirk and not jump back every time I raise my hand. I think I can do that, Shinso said. Izuku just smiled. Shinso eventually raised his head and looked Izuku in the eyes. I am guessing you want us to keep your real quirk secret. Yes please, Izuku responded. You too Ida, especially you. I understand. I can't completely approve of lying, but I will respect your wishes. It shames me to admit, but some people in our school would treat you like those in your last one if they knew, especially after the presentation we did last term. I see how you would have found the information. Izuku started. Right. It really didn't help my mental state at the time, since it was the only case of someone with a similar quirk I could find. About my classmates, how about you? I heard what you said about my kicks. I cannot argue against the arguments you made. I just wish you can consider me as a friend also, even though I might not understand what you have gone through. Izuku looked at Ida from the corner of his eye and raised his hand, its hole now visible. He put it on Ida's shoulder as the taller teen saw him do it. Ida didn't even flinch. Izuku smiled softly. Sure. Thanks for watching this video. Part 3 is over. If you really enjoy this video, like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification. And also check out the playlist that I have created and enjoy. Link is in the description. See you in the next video. Goodbye.